welcome back to the latest episode of the Master of None podcast. I am your host, as always, Stephen Murphy, joined by the regular rugby crew of Westy and Sam. I'm rocking a cap because I got skinned last night by my girlfriend, and my head's cold. My head is cold. COVID cut, boys. It's it was bound to happen. Westy, you've got some luscious locks going. Sam, you've got kind of long hair.
For the opposite reason as you, as I haven't had a haircut since the 20-something of December, and it's getting a bit unmanageable.
It is. It's about that time
you
again.
You gotta steer into the skid. Like, I'm not shaving, I'm not getting a haircut. It's
Yeah,
I'm the same.
I will shave when we are free.
I'm the same, but I have to go back to work next week, and unfortunately, I can't grow a beard like you can. Mine just gets raggedier. Like, it doesn't fill out; it just gets more ragged.
Yeah, and I'm also, I grow an afro, and that's just not a good look. So, but we're not here to talk about hairstyles, Westy. Even though that would be a great podcast, that would be right. The Master of One Blade. We could do that. There's a spin-off.
Horrendous hairdo.
There was a couple of skinheads in the Irish team as well.
Henderson's was worse than anything Sexton arrived with the last few weeks.
I think it's just because Henderson looks like he's a villain in some sort of movie, doesn't he? Because he's a big man.
Bring back the Quinn Rue mullet.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan.
No, it was terrible. Sorry, Quinn.
I miss it now. It's gone.
Quinn, we love you and wish you a speedy recovery, but that mullet was terrible. We're just putting it out there. It's terrible. But we're here to talk about rugby. We had another Six Nations weekend, round 2. Another fascinating weekend of rugby, another entertaining game with Scotland and Wales, which is one of the best games I've seen in a long time. England-Italy was a bit of a snooze fest, but we saw some lovely Italy play. And then, of course, Ireland-France on Sunday, which is plenty to talk about. So we'll start with the Irish game, boys. France coming out on top by 2 points. A game that was very much there for us to take, but at the same time, no one has too many positive words to say on the performance. Westy, we'll start with you. What was your initial reaction? Because obviously Billy Burns was in, Gibson Park was in. It was the first time since 2012, I think, we haven't had Murray or Sexton kind of starting for us. What was your expectations going into the game?
That's definitely not a true statistic. Maybe in the Six Nations, but we've definitely had other halfback pairs.
Six Nations, I think. Yeah.
My reaction, I was pretty excited by the team, to be honest. I thought it was. I mean, they were forced, but there were some nice changes in there. Great to see Tyke Byrne retain his jersey in the second row because I think that's where he belongs. Poiter obviously starting as well was great. I don't know, my reaction kind of to the game itself was just it looked like people kind of playing off a script. I think like the likes of Billy Burns, for example, I think he executed a game plan that he was given quite well. But again, first off, when I say that without knowing exactly what the game plan was, but it looked like they were given quite rigid kind of play to play into. We were constantly, every time, 1 or 2 hit-ups, then we booted the ball back to them. I would think the strategy there was to catch the rush defence and get in behind them and force them to leave a couple extra men back and then create holes for us to barrel our way through. But, I mean, there was no sign of that ever actually working. So I don't know why we stuck with it for 80-odd minutes. But anyway.
Yeah, that seems to be the team. It was almost Schmidt-like in the fact of we are robots, so we will do as we're told. And the initial, Billy Burns is an instant kind of player, and that's what makes him good. And at Ulster, that's what he does. And everyone seems so focused on the plan that we've seen. I think Murray Kinsella broke it down on Twitter, the line-out steal in the first 10 minutes of the game. There was so much space out wide, and so an overlap would have been easy to create, and they kicked the ball straight away because I'm assuming that's what they're told to do. And I think for Ulster, Billy Burns would have popped that ball out wide, 2 passes, 3 passes, and make some ground. So, Sam, is it coaching that we're looking towards here, where we're kind of laying the blame?
Yeah, I think you have to look at that. I've been a big kind of defender of the coach for well over a year now. People call him for his head very prematurely, but I think that you have to look at maybe not just Farrell, but also Cat in terms of the attack was very, very pedestrian. I liked some of the stuff in the first half. I thought that, Burns executed what looked like a game plan quite well. He was doing something similar to what Sexton was doing last week with the up and unders, not necessarily the box kicks. And they were effective, and we were kind of winning the ball back, and we had a good bit of territory in the first while. And there was once or twice we did actually look to get wide, but it was extremely telegraphed and extremely pedestrian in the manner in which we did look to get wide. There was no invention about it. There was no utilizing the obvious skill sets of Henshaw and Ringrose and bringing in Earls and playing to the best of James Lowe's ability. Keenan I thought was good, but still quite static in what he was allowed to do through whatever game plan that was. So I think that it is definitely a coaching thing. I think that the players do look like they're somewhat shackled in the manner in which they are approaching games and game plans, and that might be still overflow from a deeply ingrained Joe Schmidt mentality like that. You still I don't think can take away the fact Joe Schmidt was the coach for 8 or 9 years. That's a generation of rugby players. That's a career for some rugby players. So that is a mentality that's going to be very, very, very hard to get out of people. And Farrell's come in. We saw early on in last year's Six Nations a couple of attempted offloads and a couple of attempted things, and we all kind of went, okay, he's trying to give them a bit of freedom, and then that's just completely disappeared in the last year. So I don't know if it's disappeared because Farrell has decided to rein it back in, or because players are scared to express themselves, or a mix of both. But no, questions do have to be asked about the coaching, just in terms of what is the game plan? Are we allowing players to use the ability? Because there's some world-class players in the back line especially that are just hamstrung seemingly by the manner in which we're approaching games.
Yeah, I think if we break down forwards and backs, I think the forward pack, I thought they were pretty good overall. I thought our line out was great. Paul O'Connell has seemed to really make an impact in that. We look dangerous on their line out and we look secure on our own. Our scrum has been pretty, excellent for the 2 weeks. We haven't given away any penalties and it's just solid. But the backs, Westy, it looks every time we get the ball back there, we're either making zero ground or losing ground.
Yeah, I think it's pretty telling as well. You see towards the end of the game, we're just going backwards each time. We make 5 yards forward, but then in the next 4 phases we're pushed back 20. So you're getting a net loss. Maybe it's something of, as you said, like there's been so much focus on the set piece of the forwards. Obviously, in the modern game, the forwards have to be involved in backline play as well. It's not just wait for your next set piece or stand in your pillar and let the backs throw the ball around. And it even seems anytime we do get momentum, like, okay, the ball was distributed relatively quickly by Gibson Park. I mean, not, it's obviously a little bit more controlled than, like, let's say at the end of the Wales game where he came on and it was hell for leather, like, get the ball out quick. But you're still hitting up to forwards who are taking the ball standing still, like, or who are taking one step and catching it. Like, it's just, for a team that go on about how, we lack physicality against the likes of England, we seem to believe in this system of, if we keep hitting them up, eventually they'll get tired. But what actually happens is you spend 5 phases hitting them up and boot the ball away. France have now realized that you can't barrel through them. You've just lost psychological edge for the rest of the game if you don't try anything new.
And the first few kicks were good; they were contestable. But Doolin at full back had a cracker of a game. Like, he was, after the third or fourth ball, he was smothering up everything, and he was playing amazingly. So again, I go back to my robots point. It doesn't seem to be that there's any, okay, this is not working, let's try something different. It seems to be, this is what I'm told to do. And so it's like, some blame has to come on the players, Sam. They're not kids. These are professional players who've been playing for years.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think that's one of the problems. I don't know if it's because they're all buying in far too much into a system, and that's what's hamstringing them, because these are players like Billy Burns, we see with Ulster, is regularly putting in little, like, skip passes around the back, chips through, like that's part of his game. But he was standing so deep and playing, like, just he was kicking it instantly off first phase, second phase, third phase, and then the same kicks over and over. Whereas you'd like to think someone that's playing with the skeleton of a game plan, but allowing themselves to express themselves, they might kick it once or twice and then see that that's changed, and then change it up and drag the fullback all over the place instead of doing the same thing over and over and over again. It is definitely somewhat on the players, but I think that the questions have to be asked of the coaches in terms of, like, what is being asked of them, because it looks very much like they're being instructed to do that, and they you want players to buy into what a coach says as well. So, you have to commend them if that's the case. If they are sticking vehemently to what the coach is telling them to do, that's commendable. It's not working. So something has to happen from a coaching point of view or a player's point of view. On Westy's point about forwards, like, I read a stat earlier that we have the most meters gained in the entire championship, and that CJ Stander has increased his average meters per carry from, like, 1 to nearly 5 4.5 or something like that. So there's players playing a very direct style of rugby that doesn't seem to be in any way beneficial. Like, how can we be the highest meters gained team in the championship and be 2 losing bonus points, no wins, like with the least offload? So there's something
I think that's the point. That is the least offloads.
There's something structurally wrong with trying and succeeding in barreling through over and over and over again, and then not changing it up. Like we played from mini rugby onwards, it was always you barrel it up and you hit it up and you hit it up to create space and to do something on the 3rd or the 5th or the 7th phase. But it seems that Ireland are doing the same thing 3 times and then kicking it, or the same thing 10 times and then not doing anything with it, which I think is the problem. I think that's where the biggest flaw lies, is that everything is extremely telegraphed and everything is extremely stock, really, for want of a better word, they're just hitting it up and hitting it up and hitting it up and doing very, very basic things and not approaching it in the way when France scored their first try, that was kind of the first attack France had, and it came from relatively from nothing, but it was players allowed to express themselves and try something without any fear of consequence if something went wrong. They can back themselves because they have the buy-in from everyone.
Yeah, and just to go back on that stat, the offloading, I think Ireland are averaging around 50 or so carries per offload, whereas France are 9. So that shows you the contrast. France are the least and we're the most. And it's Stone Age rugby in a lot of ways. Like, teams have modernized their attack, and offloading is incredibly important. It's not everything. I'm not saying it's everything, but it is so important to look at Italy. They keep the ball alive, and that's where a lot of their scores come from. And they're the worst team in the competition. But I am envious sometimes of their attack when I look at Ireland play. I'm like, God, I'd kill for a Garbisi or a Varney or something like they are so much better at attacking than we are. And I don't think it's the players. Those players have the talent and the capabilities of being attacking players. I think it's just either the system or they've been beaten down so much by previous systems that it's nearly overtaken their creative part of their brain. It's just so robotic now. But
encouraging that style of game doesn't necessarily mean that all 15 players have to be ball players.
Yeah.
Like, if you look back to, we discussed it during the first lockdown, the Connacht win in the Pro 12 final in 2016, there was a lot of good offloaders, but there was players like Ali Muldowney, who wasn't necessarily an offloading player, but he was a playmaker, and John Muldoon was able to pass, and there was passing as well as just offloading. Offloading out of a tackle is one skill that allows you to break forward. But if you look at CJ Stander's stats, that the increasing from 1 meter carry to 5 meter carry, that's because he's carrying, and he's carrying harder. He's not playmaking. He's not playing it out the back. I think people are obsessed at the moment with offloading. Offloading doesn't necessarily mean out of a tackle. It can just be link play. It can be around the back stuff. Like the one opportunity we got, which was Lowe's, near try in the corner, looked like a lovely little set play move that went behind the dummy runner and out the back. And Keenan probably passed a little bit early. And you saw similar in Leinster games earlier in the season. You see similar in Connacht games all the time with like those hard lines and forwards linking to the out half, and that can be just as effective as an offload.
Yeah, agreed. Wesley, I want to start talking about Gibson Park and Burns in general, because they were the new guys in. They were replacing Murray and Sexton, so a lot of them, the magnifying glass was on them. What was your review of both of their performances?
I want to say first off, I don't think either of them were bad. Again, I've already said I thought Billy Burns did what was asked of him by the coach, as opposed to like what maybe the people are asking of the new 10, let's say. I thought he ran some really good lines. He distributed the ball pretty well. Again, I will say the decision making involving the kicks, I think, is wrong, but I maybe I'm been too generous, but I don't think that's his decision, because as Sam has said, that's not how we're really used to seeing him play too much for Ulster. So I thought he was pretty good. Is he the 10 to take us to the next World Cup? I'm not sure, but I by no means scrap him now. I think he can definitely, there is room for him to develop, let's say. The Gibson Park stuff, again, I thought he distributed the ball pretty well. We are strangely you guys talking about offloading after a tackle. It's not even necessarily, as you say, offloading while being tackled. If CJ Stander breaks the line and makes 5 meters, that next ball needs to be quick, whereas we just seem to be slowing down and waiting for the next pod to get there and then send them and giving France so much time to get back online. So again, I don't know, is that Gibson Park calling forwards to get around, or is that probably is a systematic thing? I think the main thing that I saw, and it's an easy criticism, but Gibson Park's defense is kind of spotty at best. Like we did see him shoot in for that Olivant try. You do kind of have to ask more of your players than that. Like if that was Jacob Stockdale, we'd tear through him, you know. So you're gonna have to hold everybody to the same standard there. It is a pretty poor error.
On that note, a good few people messaged me on Instagram after James Lowe shut up saying, if that was Stockdale, you would slate it. So yes, that was
Yeah, well, I
awful
agree with
defense
Lowe
by
as well.
James Lowe. Yeah, that was terrible defense by James Lowe. If that was Stockdale, we'd be giving it to 100%. We're not. Again, this is what we're not singling out Stockdale. Anyone who does something stupid, that is bad. Lowe was poor in that in a couple of instances.
Yeah, but I thought Gibson Park, was the same. His defense was kind of spotty enough. And as I say, like the difference is we're probably maybe a little bit harder on Stockdale because Stockdale is, let's say the owner of the jersey, according to the media. We're kind of arguing that, well, look, we should try somebody else because of this. Like Gibson Park, is still only his fourth or fifth cap in an Ireland jersey. In this scenario, I do think there's a far better scrum half available to us that we're not using. There's even a slightly better scrum half available to us. There's probably two in Connacht that are slightly better that are available to us. I was happy. Overall, I don't think they were the reason that we lost at all. I think it probably would have been the same if it was Murray and Sexton.
That's an important point. I want to make that clear. And if you're watching that game and we would have won if we had Murray and Sexton, I totally disagree. Do you know what I mean? I think that last year we went to France with a so-called stronger team and we lost by, I don't know what the margin was, but it was much more than 2 points. I know this is in Dublin, that was in France, but still the point stands. Like, I think people had unrealistic expectations going to that game. France are one of the best teams in the world, and we are coming in with a brand new 9-10 partnership who have never played together before. Like, what were people expecting? You're missing James Ryan as well. You're missing like a couple of real, experienced players. What were people expecting it to click straight away, Westy?
Well, see, I think unfortunately, in the Billy Burns case, because of last week, it almost had to click straight away. I think if he had done 9 things right and 1 thing wrong, that still would have been the talking point. Even if we had won, it still would have been like, oh, do you remember that people are even saying like, oh, that penalty he missed in the first 10 minutes, that was so gettable. But sure, Jolly Bear missed one identical 3 minutes beforehand. So you really can't go saying, oh, well, we should have got that. It's like, well, they missed a very similar one. If you start talking about if we'd got penalties, then, if me aunt had ball, she'd be my uncle at the end of the day.
Yeah, if she had wheels, she'd be a bike. That's just the rules. But I think, personally, on the Gibson Park, I think Burns, I agree totally, Westy. I think he had a pretty, a good game. Like, he didn't do anything really stupid or like that. I thought he managed the game well. The missed kick would have really settled him early. But he stepped up to the next one and slotted that home. So fair play to him for that. Gibson Park, I love him as a player in the sense of I love his attitude towards the game. There was one play at the end that summed him up perfectly. It was he caught the ball from a Gary Owen, was going out of bounds, offloaded behind his back to Lowe, and Lowe made a break. And where most players would have been happy enough with the offload, the first person there to take the offload off Lowe was Gibson Park. And my point being with that is no other Irish scrum half, I think, will do that. Gibson Park that's bred into him. That's just in his. You can't coach that. That is literally in his instinct. Whereas the box kicking and the tactical kicking is something that may not be his instinct, but I feel like you can coach that. His box kicking was pretty good. It was very contestable kicks throughout the game, right?
Yeah, I think figure at the start. Yeah,
his kicking was absolutely fine. The problem was more the tactic of kicking being overused. I think Billy Burns was very effective with those standing deep up and unders a couple of times, and Gibson Park was very effective with some very high box kicks that held up quite a while and were contestable. But it got to 20 minutes in and it was all we were doing, and we were doing it between the halfway line and their 22 onto their 22 and allowing them to mark and clear their line, and that was when it started to get old and stale. I think it was very much a tactic that we thought would beat them. Maybe it was a tactic that we thought would kind of nullify their quick defensive line, because their defensive line was extremely quick, verging on offside a few times, but they were up in the faces, and maybe that's what they wanted to do, and they wanted to slow that down. But it kept going all game. I don't think Gibson Park had a bad game. On the point you said about it having to click, I think what I was hoping would happen was that I was hoping Billy Burns would have a really motivated game, based off what happened at the end of the last game. And that the fact there was a couple of new players in We're going to give everyone a little bit of an exciting lift. Stuff might not necessarily have always clicked, but change is good. You see this new manager bounce in the Premier League the whole time when there's a new player, a new manager brought in, and suddenly the form picks up. And that's what I was kind of hoping would happen. I was hoping it would just take a few people by surprise and maybe catch the French off guard, as opposed to necessarily it clicking and us being better than the French, because I didn't think that was ever going to happen. I think they're one of the best teams in the world at the moment, with some of the best players in the world, and such a depth of strength and depth as well. But I was kind of just almost hoping that it would click and everyone would get a nice little bounce off the fact that there were some new players in, take a few people by surprise and maybe try something. But I said after the game, I thought there was a few positives, and I did think there was positives. I think the attitude is absolutely brilliant. I don't think there's any questioning anyone's attitudes. I thought Henderson was great, and I thought Ruddock was very good. I thought the front row was good again. Defensive line out has to be commended. Fair play to Paul O'Connell for doing that. But I thought that it was too pedestrian at times. The back line didn't look like they were trying anything. And you have a back line there with, Henshaw and Ringrose, Earls, Keenan, Lowe. Like, these are players. These are instinct players. They're top quality athletes. Like, strong, fast, everything there. Skill sets beyond belief. And they're not being allowed to utilize that because, first phase kicking it up and under it's just nullifying everything. So I think something has to be asked about the attack coach, definitely. I don't want to lay the blame on any one individual, because I don't know how much Mike Catt has in terms of authority over what happens. Maybe it's all Andy Farrell working through Mike Catt, or maybe Andy Farrell is doing what Andy Friend does and allowing Mike Catt to have complete control. So you don't know, but something has to change. There has to be a shake-up, and we have to see positive signs, especially against Italy and then the last couple of games.
I think Farrell needs to put a leash on the cat.
Oh.
Thank you. That just came to me out of nowhere. That just came to me. Amazing. We'll get to the kind of how we feel going forward in a few seconds. I want to touch on Craig Casey, because on the bench, I think a few of us expected to see him. He never kind of come onto the pitch at all. Obviously, Farrell chose that it was better not to bring him on in that sort of end of game scenario. I see where Farrell's coming from. If that's your first taste of international rugby, that's going to be a cauldron. But at the same time, again, brings light on the selection of Casey. If you are not willing to play him in a game, why is he there? If Cooney is on that bench, does Cooney come on?
Yeah, I think he does. I mean, it comes down to a question of international experience, right? The clear thing is that here's a young lad who doesn't have a lot of experience. I don't want to. We're 2 points down. There's 5 minutes to go. I don't want to bring him on. I think if it's Cooney, he does come on. I think that's, Cooney, funnily enough, was in camp all week, so he could have been there on the bench. Although we do see that if Andy Farrell brings players to camp during the week, they very rarely, like Ed Byrne is an exception to that. Like that, you very rarely see them in the squad the following week. I think you're right. I think it's a worrying thing. Like, that game was never not going to be close. We were never going to run away with it. So bringing on a capable 9 was always going to be a thing we had to do, whether it be 20 minutes to go or 10 minutes to go. And I'm not saying Casey isn't capable, but as you say, maybe Andy Farrell doesn't think he is.
My point is, and people are saying, if Murray wasn't injured, Casey wouldn't be there. But my point is, it's rugby. Injuries happen all the fucking time. You can't bring a third scrum half and expect your 2 other scrum halves not to pick up any knocks. That's just not going to happen in a Six Nations. Like, Sam, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I thought the use of the bench was actually a bit strange, not just in the Casey case, but I think the leaving James Lowe on essentially for what looked like, because he has a big left boot, was also strange, because Earls was kind of far more involved in a number of moments just before he came off for Larmour, and I thought Larmour was the right decision to bring on, because it is a spark, it is something that can do something. But I thought bring him on for Lowe, the clearing with his left boot is secondary to what you want from a winger. But yeah, with Casey being on the bench, you feel a bit disappointed for him. I can understand the thinking about not bringing him on, just the pressure cooker. Sometimes you can over-tinker as well. You can over-bring on changes and stuff, and maybe they just didn't want the continuity. You already had Burns gone off for Byrne, and then to change the other half back as well. Maybe it would it's nothing against his ability, but just about the fact that there were too many kind of changes, changing of a system in a game that we were very close in. It could have gone, a penalty could have gone our way and it could have been slotted. So maybe he just didn't want to tinker too much and to just break up that continuity. Or he also maybe just didn't want to lump too much pressure on a young lad. You saw what happened to Billy Burns last week when he's a young lad, like 3 caps into his career, and he makes a mistake, and the world is calling for his head and his like contract to be terminated. Like maybe he just didn't want to do that in such a tight game. Bringing on Casey knocks it on, and the world goes, "How is this guy even in the squad?" and gets mental on Twitter. So there's a number of reasons why it didn't happen. I would have liked to have seen it, because I did think that, we needed that change in pace. You can see from that last passage of play, we went across the pitch and back, and across the pitch and back 10 yards and forward 5 yards and back 10 yards. And I think that Casey, what I've seen of him, the thing he does is get the ball out quickly, which, that turns defenses, and that does allow you to kind of react on the front foot. So maybe he could have been the difference in that last passage of play. He could have forced a penalty for an offside or anything. So you would have liked to have seen him, but I can kind of understand a couple of different reasons that he might not have been brought on.
Yeah, personally, again, it's nothing against Casey. I would have liked to seen him on too, just switch it up. But again, it just comes back to the selection of him in the first place, and over the likes of Akira Marmion or John Cooney, and that's the reason I brought it up, because I think it's an interesting talking point.
It's an interesting point, though, just with Marmion, without sounding too Connacht biased, but Marmion has had a lot of success in his Irish career as a sub-scrum half. One thing that he has done very well is come on and change the style and the point of attack from Murray in the past. So having someone like Casey, who is a different type of player to Gibson Park, could have been very successful and changed the type of attack. I think having two contrasting nines is an excellent thing to have. So you would have liked to have seen something like that, like the way Marmion comes on for Murray sometimes and changes it up. You would have liked to see Casey come on and bring a little bit of pace, because I think Gibson Park was slow, and I don't know if that was tactics. Both Burns and Ross Byrne were so deep. So to me, it screams they were trying to slow down that French defensive line. I don't know what the other reasoning for it was, but
yeah. We'll finish on the Irish game. Westy, Sam, you've already kind of given us your outlook of the whole situation. Westy, positive or negative? How are you kind of feeling about the whole situation?
It's vaguely positive in a lot of ways, because like we could have, like I do genuinely see a day where we lost that game by 40 plus points, like where we were Italy against England and just got hammered. Defensively, we were good, as you guys said, and people are saying it, and it sounds like a kind of an old cliche, but the kind of spirit and I suppose the cohesiveness of the team. It's not like you see gaps opening up because men aren't working. Like we are working, and it does seem to be going pretty well. I mean, I was happy with the changes made. I thought we are seeing a bit of a use of depth now. Like we're talking all about Ireland, but like France were outstanding. Like they really were, and we did very well to hold them kind of. To bore them to death for 60 minutes, really. Maybe that was the game plan. So yeah, I thought defensively and kind of organizationally, we were good. Like it's you're not watching that game and thinking like this is a team in disarray. Okay, like the attack stuff is kind of worrying, but no, I thought there was a lot of positives to take from the team structure itself.
Yeah, I agree. My opinion, actually, because I'm normally quite negative when it comes to Irish team, I was very positive after that game. And I know that sounds weird because we did look awful in attack, but it was a new 9 and 10 partnership. It was without Sexton and Murray, and it was, again, we lost by 2 points to, as you said, Westy, an incredibly gifted France team. I know the issues going forward with the ball, I feel like they are very fixable because, and I tweeted this out today, the last 11 years has been dominated by Sexton. The whole system, the whole team has been built around Sexton. And that's the kind of game plan that suits Sexton. And it worked. We were very successful at it. It was the right thing to do. That era is over. We need to move on from that. And we need to now start putting in systems that benefits our players. Burns is not going to flourish in that system. Neither will Carthy. I don't even think Ross Byrne would. I feel like he's got more in him than that as well. We've got scrum halves that are very capable of playing quick tempo ball, like Gibson Park, Cooney, Casey, whatever, whoever they want to pick. We don't have to do this tactical to kick in. We can do it to a certain extent and we can use it to our benefit. But at the same time, these kicking tactics, they're not going to get the best out of our players. It's time to move on in that sense. And what I seen was a future without Murray and Sexton, which gave me a lot of hope. I can't stress this next part enough. If we see Sexton start another game for the rest of the Six Nations, we are taking a step back.
He's going to start against Italy, man. They're gonna blood Casey, but play him beside Sexton to protect him, quote unquote.
I just feel like it would be taking such a step back. Like we're done. We're out. No, we got our opportunity. It took an injury and a HIA, but we got out. And I feel like if we take a step back now, it's just going to be such a waste. And even Liam Toland tweeted out some sense for once, but he was like, the 20-odd games we have left before a World Cup, we need to pick our tens now. This is the time to do it. That was Burns' first. Was that Burns' first start for Ireland in the Six Nations? Billy Burns, yeah.
I think did he start one of the games in the
either one, first or second start? Go back and check O'Gara's first few starts, or probably Sexton's. I can't imagine they were incredible straight off the bat. I'm not saying it's Burns that's going to take us to the next World Cup, but it's not Sexton, and that's the most important part. We need to move on, and that's why I was very positive. That first 30 minutes, I thought we looked, I know we didn't put any points on the board, but we looked really good. We looked quick. We looked dangerous. And they're very fixable errors to me that we can step up and actually take the next step. I think our ceiling has got much higher as of Sunday, rather than that glass ceiling or the ceiling that was there beforehand, where I feel like we would have capped out. And that's why I was quite positive about it.
I see it growing now among people, and we've said it since before the tournament. Like, the way to use Sexton's, the way Texans best utilized now is on the bench, is to come on. It's a steady ship. Like, Sexton can change a game for you if he comes on at 30 minutes and kind of starts redirecting traffic. And if we do that, then he could well make it to the next World Cup and could be very useful in a quarterfinal to bring on. Like, I do think Sexton is, and I say this with an asterisk, Sexton is still our best 10, but because we play a style that is built around Sexton, if we start trying to change up our game a bit more, one of the other lads could come into form. And again, as you say, Smurf, look at Sexton's first few caps. Was he as good as he was 2 years ago? No, he didn't win World Player of the Year till 2018. Like, you get better at these things.
It's unfair to expect Burns to flourish in that system that was built for Sexton, because it was.
It's unfair to expect him to be Sexton when he comes, to be at Sexton's level in Sexton's system after his second start. Like, maybe after 20 starts, he'd be at Sexton's level in Sexton's system. But
yeah, we need to give him a chance. And I'm not saying it's Burns, and I'm not saying get rid of Sexton completely, but he should not be starting games for us anymore. And it's a lovely little role for him. Come on with 10 minutes to go, possibly be a hero, kick a winning penalty. That's a pretty good, offer. So that's, I think, we need to do going forward. But
and if after a year or two of doing that, he's still the out and out best 10 we have, then fair enough. He's not going to get much worse, Like, if he gets more game time for his province and is still involved in Ireland squads, then how is that not beneficial?
We'll leave the Irish discussions there, boys, because we've been talking for long enough. But we'll move on to the next game of the weekend. Scotland versus Wales, which turned out to be an absolute classic of a match, which we all thoroughly enjoyed. Wales again. I said it last week and I say it this week again. I don't think Wales are that good, but yet here they are, 2-0, and possibly another couple of red cards on the way to a Grand Slam. But Scotland started this game incredibly well, Sam. They looked, I think a lot of us were thinking, are Scotland proper contenders here for this title? They looked that good, didn't they?
Yeah, they looked brilliant. And they looked like the Scotland that Scotland have been telling us is there for the last 4 or 5 years. Like, every Six Nations you hear Scottish pundits talking about like game plans and talking about development and talking about, players kind of, this is Scotland are coming into it and, taking a scalp every once in a while. And they really looked like very, very cohesive. Hogg seems to be really like running the show from fullback and extremely good. Like, players like Van der Merwe, brilliant. Finn Russell is such a good player, and I thought Ali Price was very good. And because they've given themselves such a strong pack, they've given themselves such a platform, they can finally start to utilize that and start to kind of put together phases and try things. And it's all very, very positive. And I think that, we'll obviously get to it, but the red card definitely hurt Scotland a lot. They could have, I think, walked the rest of that game. I think going to, like, before that red card, I thought, they could be on for a bonus point here. They really are absolutely putting it to them. I think that there was just, amongst that, like, of the 15 players, I'm looking at their starting team, like, you could name every single one of them as potential man of the match. Like, I thought Harris was brilliant. I thought Graham was brilliant. Van der Merwe, very good. Hogg, excellent. Sutherland, very good. Johnny Gray, always good. Hamish Watson, brilliant. Like, they're so strong. So I think Scotland did, like you said, absolutely look like world beaters at the time, and then for it to all capitulate in the manner of in which it did is just so depressing for Scotland, but also very in keeping with Scotland, and they're
Very Scottish, yeah, very
very
Scottish.
Scottish.
Westy, on a tangent, your starting lines 9 and 10. Is it Ali Price and Finn Russell at the moment? It probably is.
It's the one I'd be most interested to see, to be honest. And I feel bad because I never really rated Ali Price. I kind of thought that's where they were missing a player. But as Sam said, like, Hogg runs the game so well that it really complements Phil Russell. It allows him to be free in what he does. It allows him to be that kind of player that me and Sam believe Jack Carty is and would be for Ireland, or that Billy Burns has the capacity to be, kind of is a little bit for Ulster and is of the same ilk where, yeah, he's going to try stuff and it might not come off, but he has that kind of safe net behind him, knowing that Hogg's always going to beat a player when he gets the ball, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, Sam, when you saying that offload in the last second, that possibly is the greatest play I've ever seen in my life. Like, he gets knocked backwards, falls over, does like a spin, gets back up, and like does like a round, like an around the world, an offload to Van der Merwe, who I can't imagine was expecting that ball to come out of there. But on an incredible toe tap then by, I can't remember the Welsh player who tapped his ankles, but that was incredible. It was an incredible finish. Wales, Westy, how are they 2-0? Is it just the red cards? Is that what we're saying?
The red cards had something to do with it, but it's a funny. I heard I was listening to like discussions on the game over the last few days, and one of the teams somebody raised the point that, like, if Ireland had beaten France, then you'd be saying like, oh, it's a mark of a great team who can win without playing overly well. And then they slated Wales. It's like, but hold on, they just won 2 games by not playing overly well. Is that what you just said is the mark of a great team? And I think
because we're Irish and they're Welsh, so it's different for us. Yeah,
because they didn't vote for us for the World Cup.
Yeah, you gotta.
Cost us a World Cup.
They're the rules, Westy. No, I didn't make them up.
No, but I just think it's really interesting. I think, like, we said it before, like, a lot of that Wales squad, were World Cup semi-finalists. So I think ever writing them off is ridiculous. They're moving into a new system. They had their year of it not really working. Okay, it's still not really where you'd want it to be. I don't think any Wales fan was comfortable during that game because, how they won it, I still don't really know, even with the red card.
You know what the secretly most important thing that happened to Wales this year was Josh Adams going to a gender reveal party. Because if not, Rhys Sammet wouldn't have been starting these games, and he's unearthed as the next big superstar on international rugby. He was 20 years old, and definitely some defensive possibly weakness in his games, but going forward, there's no doubt about it. His star ability is incredible. Sam, again, if you're a Scottish fan, it's tough to take, isn't it? Because, as you said, they're kind of used to this, but this team feels like it really is good enough to take that next step.
Yeah, and I think the Scotland, much like ourselves last week against Wales, have the helpful and handy excuse of the red card to blame on their capitulation. I think that Hogg not going for the points twice before going into the corner and trying for it and not coming away with the points was probably bad game management on his part. I can see, because you're on the up and you have the potential to try and get that bonus point. But I think that, those sort of decisions, I texted you, I thought that it was going to bite them in the arse, and it probably did in the end. But, they'll be able to helpfully blame that red card on what happened. On top of the red card for Scotland, which was one of the reasons why they fell, but they also played well after the red card. I thought the biggest thing for Wales was a ballsy move, in fairness, but to take off Dan Biggar when it wasn't working for him and bring on Callum Sheedy, who is absolutely pure raw talent. I said it before the tournament that I thought Sheedy and Rhys Sammet were 2 players for Wales that could definitely make a difference, and I think that Sheedy will grow into that 10 role for Wales in the long term. He's such a talent. He's so much ability. And I thought that he just quickened everything up and just, allowed them to capitalise on a Scotland that stumbled. If you had Dan Biggar left on the pitch the way he was playing at the time, I don't think they would have capitalised on the stumble. I don't think they would have gotten over the line the way they did. But I thought that, it was good tactical kind of nous to make that change when it was made, and bring on some young, fresh players, and bring on people just a little bit more to their game. And then also an absolute moment of magic, like Rhys Sammet. Not just having the pace to beat the player, but also to have the wherewithal. They showed a slowed down clip of him And he looks up and he looks and he finds the space exactly where he puts the ball. Like it's like a good golfer chipping onto the green. He knew exactly where he was looking. His eyes were on the prize and he just put it over and, landed straight in his hands. It's unbelievable bit of skill to do at that pace. And that's a lot of pace. And, kind of shades of a young George North. And you'd be worried, like we were like, oh, thank God George North is 29 now. He's slowing down a little bit. And, now they're just after unearthing a new 20-year-old who's going to dominate the Six Nations for a couple of years.
You mentioned his speed. Like I watched that try back, and he's one of those annoying fuckers. He doesn't look like he's sprinting, but yet he's like galloping past Stuart Hogg, and it's like that doesn't make sense.
It was mentioned on something I was listening to earlier, might have been on the radio or podcast, but about his gait and about his stride, and he doesn't yet look like he's fully running with that kind of almost like the way that George North runs, like a gazelle. It looks like he's running very fast. It looks like he's kind of still sprinting, like he hasn't fully been trained on how to sprint properly, which is worrying because he could develop into an even faster player than he is right now if his sprint technique is improved and just honed in on the intricacies of how to sprint properly.
When you said a young George North there, Sam, I thought you were going to say like a young Stephen Murphy, but you know what? I'll let it slide.
No one's that fast, man.
Over 10 yards, I'll take anyone. I'll take fucking anyone.
Over 10 yards on the downhill, maybe. But...
yeah. And I'm rolling in a rolling battle. Westie, Wales travel. No, they don't travel. They welcome England next weekend. What are we expecting? Do you think the fairy tale will come to an end, or will someone get sent off?
Someone will get sent off.
Ellis Genge sent off.
Somebody somewhere. There'll be at least a yellow card in that game. It's England versus Wales. Like, it's one of the most brutal games you see at the international stage. No, I think if you're Wales, you're licking your lips because England have been thoroughly unimpressive in everything that they've done. Like, Italy should have beaten them if they hadn't paid the ref off beforehand. So,
Controversial.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, we'll talk about it in a few minutes. It's ridiculous. The 3 tries that were not tries in any sense of the word. And a couple of debatable ones as well. But yeah, no, I think this funny thing, the home record is really kind of out of the microscope now. We're seeing more away victories than ever before, really. But I think after that performance, I think the 2 performances will have given Wales that confidence, whereas England are still sluggish. Like a lot of their handling against Italy was atrocious. Like, so if you're Wales watching that, you're kind of thinking first off, there's that epic rivalry, so you're always going to be up for that game. And second off, you're definitely good enough to take them. I think it's going to be a really interesting game.
On the other side, Sam, Scotland travelled to Paris to take on the French, which already has the makings of being an incredible game again. Because Scotland are at that level now where you're like, I have to watch them play. Like, that's how good they have gotten. And France, obviously, we know how good they are, but that should be another cracker, Sam, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to probably be the game of the tournament if it lives up to its billing. They're both playing a brilliant brand of rugby. They're both very exciting to play. Both defend very well. I was really impressed with Scotland's defence before they went down to 14 and how just aggressive they were. And, having wingers that are absolute units helps with that. Like, Commander Merva could stand in second row if he needed to. Like, he's a complete monster. So I think that's going to be a brilliant game. I like the idea of, Finn Russell playing against a French 10, be that Jalibert or whoever it is going to be, because that could just be a whole barrel of laughs. There could be offloads and spinnies and whatever else kind of things come into it. And that's
like a Harlem Globetrotters game as well. It's going to be. Finn Russell's going to be spilling the ball in his finger, being like, "Come get it."
But then you have like the traditional rugby players as well, like a Johnny Gray, who is just he's just going to hoover up anything that's there and available. So the Scotland have a lot of opportunity. I do think France are going to be too strong in the end, but I think that Scotland have an opportunity to cause an upset. We, for all intents and purposes, are not very good. We are not very highly rated, and we still with a weakened team, we still manage to keep France to 1 score. So a Scotland that are riding high, that are tipped to be very good, most likely going to finish ahead of us unless something drastic changes, could really run France close.
Well, they bet them last year, didn't they? Scotland bet France last year. So they're not going to fear them. Move on into the first game that happened on last weekend was England-Italy. It was the worst game of the weekend, let's be honest, by far. But Westy, you're our second tier correspondent, but I feel like now you're also our Italian correspondent because of your infamous soundbite. Italy again showed some great glimpses here, didn't they, Westy?
They did, but I go against my soundbite here. I don't think they played well for 60 minutes and then fell apart in the last 10. I think they were consistent throughout the game in what they were trying to do. They moved the ball really well. I thought like the first 20 minutes of the defense was unbelievable. They were so quick off the line. They were right up in the face of England. Throughout the entire course of the game, they forced knock-ons and drop balls from the English team. Their problem was they didn't know what to do after that happened. They almost stood off and let England pick it back up and then run at them. And all of a sudden they were broken. I also think that like that first try is no more a try than like Stuart Hogg dropping a ball over the line. Like somebody bats that ball down from the air, and the fact that it wasn't checked by the referee is now it could well be the Italian. It's either Watson or the Italian defender. I can't remember who it was. It could easily be the Italian defender maybe that knocked it back, but the fact that no attention was drawn to it was a farce. But no, I think the way Italy are playing now is really, really interesting, and I think if we're not careful, we could be the team that fall to Italy because somebody will.
I am petrified. I'm not going to lie. Because they're going to score at least 2 tries. It's just going to happen. They are going to score 2 tries every game now, it looks like, because they have that. Like Varney is incredible. Ioane on the wing is incredible. Garbisi's great. Like Tommaso Allen is their backup 10, and he's really good.
Yeah, that wasn't Garbisi's best day for Italy, but man's only 20 years old. Yeah. Like, you can't.
But like, I love the way they're like, they just throw him in and be like, you will learn your craft. Some days it's not going to be great, some days it's going to be great, but we are going to stick by you. And because they see his potential, and his potential is obviously incredible. But England on their side, Sam, as Westy already mentioned, just not there at the races fully yet. Like, they obviously did enough to win this game, but from the lofty expectations that we had from that World Cup final, they just haven't seemed to push on. And Eddie Jones kind of went back to the George Ford at 10, Owen Farrell at 12, but it's just not clicking for them.
Well, I thought the Ford at 10 and Farrell at 12 looked like it made a lot more sense than Farrell at 10 the last week. I think that Farrell is probably more of a 12 overall now, to be honest, especially in that English system. But I didn't think that they were overly impressive at all. I think that it's very obvious that the Saracens players that are supposed to be some of their most senior players are out of match fitness and match practice. You can be as fit as you want. You can run all day, every day, but there's a difference between that and playing competitive rugby, and not playing one game against the Ealing Trailfinders for one of the players is not enough in the lead up to a Six Nations. And this is blatantly obvious. I also think that, from looking at English rugby, Twitter feeds and following some English kind of rugby commentators, they have as much of a kind of a gripe with Eddie Jones' selection as we do with Farrell's selection. They're not picking on form. There's some unbelievable players playing week in, week out in the Premiership that aren't getting anywhere near the team, and they're going back to the tried and tested, and they're playing players like that enough about. The Vinopolas, Curry's a great player, Toji, Sinclair, like the 2 Vinopolas, Ford, like you mentioned, Farrell. These are players that Eddie Jones knows enough about, and he's not getting the best out of them. So the players that are on form should be getting played. I think that England are in a bit of a rut, and it's not like they can use transition as any sort of excuse, because they have the same coach and the same players as they've always had. Whereas at least with Ireland, we have the transition arguments of having a new 9-10 axis, having a new coach. Those sort of things are a good excuse, whereas England have none of that. They're the same group of players that got to the World Cup final, the same coach that got to the World Cup final, and it just looks like it's gone absolutely stale. And that does look like it's the selection fault. It looks like that they picked players that are not up to speed and aren't playing the best and aren't the best in the country at the moment. So that's kind of their own doing and their own fault. And I think that, worryingly for Ireland, it will click a little bit more throughout the tournament, because the players that are lacking the match practice are getting the match practice. I don't like the idea of getting match practice on the time of the international team, but if that's what you want to do, and Vinopola is back to his best by the time we play them, that's worrying. But I think that, for the moment, their chances in this tournament are pretty much gone if they continue to play the way they are.
Yeah, but England do this. They don't necessarily mind, I won't say sacrificing, but they don't care about a Six Nations 2 years out from a World Cup. They've done this before, and they seem to be doing it again.
That's probably due to the fact that they have massive private investment in the club game. Ireland are 100% reliant on the revenue of the Six Nations to fund the sport in this country, not just to fund the national team, but to fund the provinces and to fund the AIL and to fund everything. Like, I think it's something close to 75% of rugby's funding comes through the Six Nations or the international team. That's bad for us, you know. Whereas England, it might not be the most ideal situation where you have private investment and you have profit making off clubs, but it does seem to allow them to gear up for World Cups and to build and to not necessarily take the international game as seriously 2 years out, whereas we have to, and we're reminded that we have to all the time. There's contract renewals going on at the moment, and the rumors are that players are going to be offered academy standard contracts to keep them here for a year or so because the clubs can't afford them.
Yeah, no, it is a very fair point, and I get that point. Westy, before we finish up, Johnny May's try where he jumps over the defender. How are we feeling about this? Because personally, I think that it's a penalty because if the defender wasn't there, he isn't jumping. He's jumping to get over the defender. So, Westy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've read the kind of debates that like it's jumping into the tackle, so it's technically a penalty. But is that a spectacle that we actually want to remove from the game? Like that's an amazing piece of skill for him to finish that ball. I think there's nothing to stop you. You dive over the try line, so where does the distinction end? You know?
Yeah, but if the defender isn't there, he doesn't do that. Is my point.
Yeah, but if a defender isn't, like, you can say that about anything, you know? Like,
no, but he jumps up. He jumps over. It's incredible. I agree.
The laws are massively ambiguous. This is the thing: is people keep telling me
you're ambiguous.
People keep telling me that you're not allowed to jump into a tackle, but actually, when they're quoting the law says you can't enter a tackle dangerously. It's being interpreted as jumping into a tackle is dangerous, but actually, it doesn't say jumping into a tackle or jumping over a tackle. It doesn't specifically say that. It's like that's one of the things we were criticized on this podcast about a year ago for referring to them as rules, because they're not. They're laws and they're interpretable. And even Nigel Owens, when he tweeted that he thinks it would have been a penalty, can only say he thinks it would have been a penalty. He wasn't able to back it up with any direct ruling because there is none. There's ambiguous laws that can be interpreted. And he didn't jump dangerously into a tackle. He avoided a player by diving for a try line, which is something you see day in, day out in rugby. And it's a skill that is actually trained. There's video footage of Johnny May practicing that skill from 2015, diving onto a tackle bag to score tries in the corner at a training camp. So like that's the unfortunate ambiguity that surrounds interpretations of laws. And I've given out about the fact that there is an inconsistency with reffing because the laws are ambiguous, and that can be a bad side effect of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it reminds me very much of when Jackie Moon threw a ball to downtown Funky Stuff Malone for the first ever alley-oop, and people thought it was a foul. So, Westy, you're right. Too foul. You're correct, Westy. I don't want to take that spectacle out. You've totally changed my mind on that. So, well done to you.
Yeah, but that Sam said, you're diving, you're jumping over the player to get to the line. You're not jumping at the player. If he jumped up and put his knees up and tried to hit him in the face with his knees, then that's a very different story.
Or if he had jumped and landed and then scored the try. But the fact that he puts the ball down in the same motion as the jump, the fact that it's one single motion and the ball gets put down, therefore to me shows that it's a dive for the line. If he jumps, lands, and puts the ball down, that's two individual motions. But I think that because it's the same passage of movement, it's the same motion, I think that is proof that it's diving for the line. He lands in with the ball in and scores the try.
Just to go back to England on the whole there before you finish up, you know, we're talking about them like they just lost to Italy, you know. They won, and they won very well. But one of the things I found that, like, I kept looking up at the score during the game and being surprised that England were so far ahead.
Yeah, I know, I agree. And I thought Italy were really, really good. And defensively, they've got some issues, don't get me wrong.
And the penalty count was, you know, they really have to have better control than that.
But they have a great nucleus of players there that they can build on if they stick with it. Like, they've got some great talent there.
Yeah.
And talent that any team would be envious of, not just like Six Nation teams. Like, they are that good attackingly. So, as we said before, I am nervous next weekend when we play them, because I think we have a great opportunity to progress. But if we lose to Italy, it's going to be an absolute shit show. So
we have to experiment though. Like if Sexton and Murray start that game, then I'd like.
But it's like
I give up.
It's such lose-lose playing Italy at this point, because You either bring in all the young lads and they win and it's only Italy, or they lose and it's I can't believe they lost to Italy, or you play the old lads and they win and it's only Italy, or they like don't play well and still win and it's like couldn't even beat the hide off Italy. So
It's
like,
lose-lose if you're an idiot though, and you don't see rugby. Like if you're saying that, then you're an idiot.
2021 Twitter. Like,
Yeah, well, I stopped I told you to stay away from those pages and stop going on Facebook. But yeah, here you are, still doing it, Sam.
I deleted Facebook. It's gone.
Yeah.
I'm not subjecting myself to that.
Sam would, after a game, literally log on to Facebook just to get annoyed at what people were saying. and he was wondering why he was getting so annoyed. So that's why. Lads, we'll leave it there. We'll be back next week. We'll do some Pro 14 next week because we got some on this weekend. Connacht are playing. All provinces are playing.
Yeah, massive second versus third in Conference B.
Yeah, some good games. It's good to have the club scene back, actually. So
yeah, and you know, Bundy coming back. I think Bundy really needs like a man of the match performance at the moment, just because he's been out of kind of the limelight for a while. He hasn't played much for Connacht the last couple of weeks, what with having the baby and being injured and that, and then not featured at all in the 23 for the first two. I think he needs a big game this weekend. So, let's go, boys.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be back to recap it all next weekend. And I have in the works, I think Jeff Neville, aka the Loose Head Podcast, will be joining me next week as well to chat some Irish rugby. So that'll be fun. So look out for that. Boys, appreciate it as always. We'll chat to you next week.
Bye.
Hey, boys.
Hey, boys.